In this video, I'm going to show you how to do the basic oil change on a Fox F-Series fork. This is not the oil change on the Travel Adjust forks. This is the service that Fox recommends doing every 30 hours of riding. If your conditions are not that harsh that you typically ride in, you could probably go 50 to 60 hours of riding before doing this service. This will not be the service that goes into the damper side. That's the one Fox recommends every 100 hours of riding, and it's also one that I'd recommend sending your fork back into Fox because that one's a little bit more involved. This is most of what you're going to need to do this service. You're going to need the 10-weight green Fox oil. You're going to need 5 cc's of Fox float fluid. I have a container here, but you can also get this in a 5 cc pillow pack. You're going to need something to measure the oil and pour the oil into, something like this container. It's also very helpful to have one of these cheap syringes that you can grab at a drugstore. This is a 10 milliliter syringe, and that's not only helpful for measuring the oil but putting it back inside the fork. You're also going to need to pick up 2 of these crush washers from your local bike shop. You're also going to need a 26 millimeter socket wrench. You'll need a 10 millimeter socket wrench, and you'll need a few Allen wrenches. You'll need a 2 millimeter, a 2.5, a 4, and probably a 5 for your stem and top cap. Some of them use a 4, and also probably a 5 to remove your brake caliper. You'll also need a torque wrench. The 2 torque specs you'll need for this are 5.8 Newton meters and 24.8 Newton meters. So have a torque wrench that'll span that range, or maybe 2 torque wrenches. And then you'll need a shock pump. You'll need a rubber mallet. It's very helpful to have a work stand. It's not required, but it does make this job easier. And then you're going to need something to catch the oil. And I've got a standard oil pan, but just something that's going to allow the oil to drip into. Before you put your bike in the work stand and remove the fork, you're going to want to remove the air cap on the left side. And when I refer to sides in this video, it's going to be the sides as if you were standing behind the bike. So the spring side, which is the air side, is the left side. Okay, I highly recommend loosening the air spring cap before you remove the fork. That way you can leave the bike on the ground, push down real hard on your socket wrench while you turn it. That will prevent the socket from stripping this cap, which is easy to do because the bolt does not stick up very high. So again, with the bike on the ground, push down, turn counterclockwise, and just loosen that cap. Once it starts to turn, you can stop because you've got air pressure inside it. We're going to release that once the fork is off the ground. Okay, now I put the bike in the work stand to remove the fork, and to do so I'm going to remove the front wheel. Okay, I'm going to remove the brake caliper, and you'll probably have a cable retainer like what's on this Fox fork. If not, you may even have a zip tie that you have to cut. Okay, next I'm going to loosen my stem bolts, and always loosen and tighten stem bolts evenly for each bolt. Keep the top cap on while you do that so the fork doesn't fall out. Once the stem bolts are loose, now it's time to loosen the top cap. Keep a hand under the fork, okay, because it could drop out. I take my top cap off, set it aside, keeping your hand on the fork, and then I'm going to remove the fork and grab the stem, remove that, and then keep an eye on your spacers at the top and your bearings. Just keep a hand on everything, and I'm not going to go into detail on spacers and headsets because I'm going to assume you already know how to do that. But just take all of your spacers and bearings and set those aside on a clean surface. Alright, now I removed the bike from the work stand so I could clamp the fork in the work stand. And you don't have to have a work stand, but it does make this job a lot easier. Okay, now I'm going to take my 2 millimeter Allen wrench, and I'm going to remove the rebound adjuster bolt by just loosening this Allen bolt inside and It does not need to be loosened very much, probably about 3 or 4 turns, and it'll slide right off. Okay, now I'm going to take my 10mm socket and loosen both of these bolts. These will not be very tight. They're only about 5.5 Newton meters. And have your drain pan underneath. You probably will not have any oil come out yet, but do have your drain pan underneath. And I'm going to remove both of these and set them aside. You may have the crush washer stay on the bolt that protrudes from the bottom, as happened in this case, so make sure you remove that as well. And now remove the other side in the same manner. Now on the rebound side, you've got this protrusion where the rebound knob went onto. Be very careful with this. You want to make sure that you don't turn your wrench and bend this. So we'll get both of those bolts off. And now we're ready to release the oil. Now it's time to tap on these bolts and release the oil because these are stuck down to the stanchion tubes. But here's a tip, and that is you can either take the original bolt that was on there and thread it upside down, but what I would recommend is picking up another one at the bike shop and using that one, or maybe using one of your other ones but having one on standby, because there's a chance you could dent this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread this back on, and this is helpful for the spring side but really mandatory on the damper side. So I'm just going to thread this on upside down, and I'm going to tap on the bolt until I see it go up inside the stanchion tube, and the oil will probably come out at that point. Good. So that moved, and I know it's loose, and I'm just going to take the bolt off. No oil is coming out yet, so it'll probably come out when I tap on the other side. And here comes some. Starting to drip out. And let's do the same thing on the damper side. Okay, I've got that bolt threaded on the damper side, and it doesn't really matter which one you do first. But when you do the damper side, thread that bolt just far enough to where that protrusion doesn't stick out the bolt, because you don't want to tap on that with the hammer. Okay, so that came loose. I'm going to thread out the bolt, and now all the oil is going to come out. Okay, now I'm going to remove the lowers completely off the bike, and you probably want to hold the lowers over the drain pan while they finish dripping out. Okay, now that the lowers are off the bike, I'm going to take some rubbing alcohol, put it on a paper towel or a clean rag, and then just wipe off your stanchion tubes really good. And you'll probably have an O-ring on the left stanchion tube. Just make sure that doesn't come off, but you do want to move it around a little bit to get that stanchion tube very clean. Also take a clean rag or paper towel with rubbing alcohol and really wipe off your seals. Now I'm not going to show how to change the seals. These are new. This is my first oil change on this fork. But if your seals look damaged at all, you'll want to replace those. And really you just pop those out with an open-ended wrench and put some new ones in. So it's not a bad idea to have some new seals on hand if this is a fork that's over a year old. And if the fork is a 1.5 to 2 years old, just plan on going ahead and replacing those seals. So I'm going to clean really good around them. I can also take a clean paper towel, kind of push it down inside there, and use a long Allen wrench if you have one, or something very narrow that you can push it back out the top, and that will clean inside of the lowers. But be very careful when you do that, that whatever object you use to push the paper towel back out does not touch the sides of the fork or the seal, because you don't want to scratch those. So if you don't have that and you don't want to do that, it's not mandatory, but it does help clean inside of your lower. So just get everything real clean. Okay, at this point I'm going to go ahead and release the air out of the top cap. And you may need something to push down on that Schrader valve. Now I'm going to take my 24mm wrench, and if you follow my tip in the beginning, this top cap should already be pretty loose. So I'm going to remove that. Now I'm going to take the fork out of the stand, and all I'm going to do is turn it upside down and dump out the float fluid that's inside here. So just hold it over your drain pan and dump it out. Now that we have the float fluid dumped out, just take a clean paper towel with rubbing alcohol. Just kind of wipe off inside the threads. And then I'm going to put the fork back in the work stand. We're just going to add 5 cc's of float fluid into the top. Okay, so I put 5 cc's of float fluid into the syringe and just drop it back into the top. And again, you can also use the 5 cc pillow pack that Fox sells. Now we're just going to take our top cap, thread it back on, and then snug it up with the wrench, just tight enough where you can get some pressure on it, but we're going to fully tighten it once the bike is back together and on the ground. Now I'll just snug this back up with my 26mm socket wrench. Press down on it again so it doesn't strip off, but don't put too much pressure on this, just a little snug. And now we're going to add some air to it. So I'll hook up my shock pump, and I'll put my air pressure that I typically run inside the fork. Okay, now it's just time to slide the lowers back on, but we're not going to slide them on all the way because we've got to add our oil. And you've got to kind of line these up and make sure you put them on correctly, that you've got the spring side on the left and the damper on the right. And sometimes you just have to kind of work it around those seals and then just slide it up. But again, not all the way, maybe about 3 inches. You don't want to have those bolts protrude out the bottom yet because we've got to dump the oil in. Alright, I've got the fork upside down, leaning against something. And you'll notice that I do not have the bolts protruding out the bottom because we're going to dump the oil in through these holes. So leave those open. Alright, so I've poured some of my Fox green 10-way oil into a clean container. And this syringe is a 10 milliliter or 10 cc syringe. So I'm going to do this in 10 milliliter increments. And I'm going to suck out 10 milliliters into this syringe. And we'll do one side at a time. Now before you do this service, you want to look on Fox's website and know how much oil goes in each side. This is a 27.5 fork with 32 millimeter stanchions, and this takes 30 milliliters in each side. The 26er forks that have 32 millimeter stanchions take 20 milliliters in each side, and the 29ers take 30, just like the 27.5s. So again, I'm going to do this in 10 milliliter increments, and so I'm going to do this side first. So I'm going to do this 3 times on each side. Alright, now that I've got the oil in each side, I've still got the fork upside down, obviously, so it doesn't come out. Go ahead and slide the lowers down all the way, and you should see the bolts protrude out both sides. Okay, so take your new crush washer, slide that down on the bolt, and put your lower bolt on, and then we're going to tighten it up using a torque wrench. Okay, using your torque wrench, tighten each of these bolts to 5.5, technically it's 5.6 Newton meters. And then do the same thing for the other side. Putting the crush washer on, the new one, putting the bolt back on, and tightening it down to 5.6 Newton meters. Alright, that's pretty much it for changing the oil in this fork. Before you put everything back together, make sure you wipe off your crown race on your fork. Take a clean paper towel with alcohol and rub down your bearings. Get those clean. You probably want to put a little bit of grease back on those before you put everything back together. Okay, I've got the fork back on, front wheel on, I've got the bike on the ground. Just like when we removed the top cap or loosened it before we started, we're going to do the same thing by putting the bike on the ground, pushing down hard, and then tightening this down. And this gets tightened to 24.8 Newton meters. Now that I've got that tight, I'm just going to put my air cap back on. And don't forget to put your rebound adjuster knob back on. You'll notice that there is a hole in the protrusion. Make sure that you line up the Allen bolt with that hole. And tighten it up with your 2mm Allen wrench. This does not need to be very tight, just enough to hold it on there. And give it a turn. Make sure that you did line up the Allen bolt inside of that hole. So that's pretty much it for doing the basic oil change on a Fox F-Series fork. As you can see, there's not a lot to this, and you can get this down pretty quick. You could probably get this done in about 20 minutes once you've done it a few times. Again, I recommend doing this every 30 to 50 hours of riding. Thanks for watching.